My name is Robert. I am 57 years old, and I have spent my entire life building things with my hands. From houses to relationships, I believed in creating solid foundations. But tonight, at my daughter Amanda's dinner table, everything I built seems worthless. My son-in-law Jackson just looked at me with that smirk of his and asked, "How does it feel to be a loser?" The table went silent. I should have been angry, but instead I found myself smiling, because I had a question of my own. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had someone underestimate your worth. Trust me, you will want to hear the question that silenced my entire family. I dedicated 35 years of my life to construction work. It was never glamorous, but it was honest. I woke up before dawn, put on my steel toe boots, and headed to job sites while most people were still dreaming. The work was backbreaking, but I never complained. Every brick I laid, every wall I framed was a step toward giving my family the life they deserved. My wife Margaret was my rock through it all. We met in high school, got married at 22, and built our life together, brick by brick, just like the houses I worked on. She was a kindergarten teacher, patient and kind with everyone she met. We were never rich, but we managed. Our small 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood was our castle. It might not have impressed anyone, but it was paid for with honest work and filled with love. Margaret and I raised 2 wonderful children, or at least I thought they were wonderful. Amanda, our oldest, was always ambitious and bright. She graduated with honors and went to state college on a partial scholarship. I worked double shifts for years to cover the rest of her tuition without loans. Thomas, our youngest, was more laid back but equally smart. He followed in his sister's footsteps to college, though he took a more winding path. Everything changed 5 years ago when Margaret was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. She fought hard, but the disease moved too quickly. Within 8 months, she was gone, leaving a hole in my life that nothing could fill. The medical bills were substantial, even with insurance. I had to refinance our home, the one we had proudly paid off just 2 years earlier. Then came my own health problems. After decades of physical labor, my body started to give out. First, it was my back, a herniated disc that required surgery. Then, while I was still recovering, I fell from a scaffold and shattered my right leg. The doctors put in pins and plates, but they told me my construction days were over. At 55, I was forced into early retirement with a pension that barely covered my needs. I had to sell our family home last year. The medical bills and reduced income left me no choice. Now I live in a small 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. It is nothing fancy, but it is clean and quiet. I tell myself it is just temporary until I figure things out. But deep down, I know this might be my life now. Amanda met Jackson at her first job after college. He came from money. The kind of family where summer homes and private schools were the norm. He graduated from an Ivy League university and landed a high-paying job at an investment firm right away. Handsome, confident, and ambitious, he swept Amanda off her feet. They dated for 2 years before getting married in a lavish ceremony that made me uncomfortable. I contributed what I could, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to what his parents provided. At first, Jackson was polite to me. There was always a certain condescension in his tone, as if he was talking to someone he considered beneath him, but he maintained a veneer of respect. After they got married, however, the pretense slowly fell away. His comments became more pointed, his questions about my career choices more judgmental. Amanda changed too. She used to call me every other day. After the wedding, those calls became weekly, then monthly. When Margaret died, she was supportive for a while, but she soon returned to her busy life. I noticed she started to wince when I talked about my financial struggles. She offered to help once or twice, but I could tell she was relieved when I declined. Her life with Jackson was on a different track, one that left little room for a blue-collar father with old-fashioned values. Thomas remained closer, but even he grew distant over time. He landed a good job in marketing in a city 3 hours away. He calls regularly and visits when he can, but he has his own life to build. I am proud of him, but I miss the days when both my children looked up to me. Jackson, meanwhile, became increasingly successful. He received promotion after promotion, and they moved into a large house in an exclusive neighborhood. Their social media was filled with exotic vacations and charity galas. Amanda stopped inviting me to their home after the third time Jackson made a cutting remark about my clothes or my occupation. We would meet at restaurants instead, where the public setting seemed to keep his worst behavior in check. The last time I saw them before tonight was at a restaurant for Amanda's 30th birthday. Jackson spent the entire meal talking about his recent bonus and their plans to remodel their already perfect kitchen. When I mentioned that I was looking for part-time work to supplement my income, he laughed and said, "At your age, who would hire you?" Amanda quickly changed the subject, but she did not defend me. That hurt more than his comment. So when Amanda called last week to invite me to dinner at their home, I was surprised. She mentioned that Thomas would be there too, along with Jackson's parents, who were visiting from Connecticut. I had met Walter and Victoria only twice before, at the wedding and at Margaret's funeral. They were polite but distant, clearly seeing me as someone from a different world. "Dad, it would mean a lot to me if you could come," Amanda said. "I feel like we have not spent enough time together lately." Her words gave me hope. Maybe she was finally recognizing the distance that had grown between us. Maybe she missed her dad. I accepted immediately, even though the thought of spending an evening with Jackson and his parents made my stomach knot. The dinner invitation came out of the blue on a Tuesday afternoon. Amanda's voice sounded different over the phone. Warmer, more like her old self. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps my daughter was finding her way back to me. "It is nothing fancy, Dad, just family dinner on Saturday," she said, though I knew with Jackson involved, nothing fancy still meant more formal than any meal I had eaten in years. I spent the next few days anxiously preparing. Though money was tight, I withdrew $60 from my carefully managed savings to buy a new button-up shirt from the department store. The navy blue one I chose was on sale, and the saleswoman assured me it looked distinguished with my silver hair. I polished my only pair of decent shoes and pressed my best slacks. Looking in the mirror, I could still see traces of the strong man I once was, before grief and hard work had carved deep lines into my face. As I got ready on Saturday evening, memories of Amanda as a little girl flooded my mind. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike, her pigtails flying behind her as she pedaled furiously down our driveway. I remembered her high school graduation, how proud Margaret and I had been as she gave her valedictorian speech. Where had that connection gone? When had money and status become more important to her than family? The drive to their house took 30 minutes from my modest neighborhood to the manicured streets of Lakeview Estates. Their house stood impressive against the evening sky, a massive colonial with perfect landscaping and a circular driveway. 3 luxury cars were already parked there. Jackson's black Mercedes sedan, his father's even more expensive-looking BMW, and my son Thomas's practical but new Honda. My 15-year-old Ford pickup looked out of place like I would in the dinner to come. A housekeeper answered the door, something that still surprised me, even though I had known they employed one. She took my coat and directed me to the living room, where everyone was gathered. The house was even more opulent than I remembered. Cathedral ceilings, marble floors, furniture that looked too expensive to actually sit on. Amanda greeted me with a hug that felt genuine, her perfume expensive but familiar. "Dad, I am so glad you could make it," she said, leading me toward the others. Thomas stood to embrace me, his grip firm and reassuring. "Good to see you, Dad," he said quietly. Jackson offered a handshake that was just a bit too firm, a power move I had come to expect from him. "Robert," he said with that practiced smile. "Nice shirt. New." Before I could answer, Jackson's parents approached. Walter was tall and distinguished-looking with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Victoria was slim and elegant in an outfit that screamed old money, her jewelry subtle but clearly valuable. "Robert, it has been too long," Walter said with practiced cordiality. "Yes, since the funeral, I believe," Victoria added as if reminding everyone of my loss. As we moved to sit down, I noticed the family photos adorning the walls and shelves. There were dozens of them. Amanda and Jackson's wedding, their honeymoon in Bali holidays, with his family in their vacation home in Aspen. There were even photos of Amanda as a child, clearly taken from our family albums. What I did not see were any recent photos that included me. I felt like a visitor in a museum dedicated to a life I was not part of. My daughter's new existence had almost completely erased her past, and me along with it. The realization sat heavy in my chest as I perched uncomfortably on the edge of an immaculate white sofa. "So, Robert, are you still in that apartment?" Victoria asked, making it sound like I lived in a cardboard box. "Yes, it suits my needs," I answered simply. "Dad's place is actually quite nice," Thomas interjected. "Great natural light for his woodworking projects." I shot him a grateful look. Since retiring from construction, I had taken up small woodworking projects to keep my hands busy. Nothing fancy. Birdhouses, simple furniture pieces, toys for the neighborhood kids. It brought me joy, even if it did not bring much income. Jackson cleared his throat. "Woodworking projects. How quaint. I suppose that helps pass the time." Before I could respond, Amanda jumped in. "Dad made beautiful things. Remember that rocking chair he built for Mom when she was pregnant with me? We still have it in the guest room." I did not know they had kept that chair. The thought warmed me until Jackson laughed. "Yes, tucked away where no one can see it. It does not exactly match our aesthetic." The conversation limped along painfully. Jackson and his parents dominated, talking about people I did not know and places I would never visit. Every time I tried to contribute, Jackson would subtly redirect the conversation, as if my input was irrelevant. Amanda kept giving me apologetic looks, but said nothing to stop it. When the housekeeper announced that dinner was ready, I felt both relief and dread. We were only getting started, and already I was counting the minutes until I could leave. The dining room looked like something from a magazine spread. A massive table of dark polished wood gleamed under a crystal chandelier. Fine china, multiple wine glasses, and more silverware than I knew what to do with awaited each guest. Fresh flowers scented the air, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers. I hesitated before sitting, suddenly conscious of my worn hands and casual posture among these polished people. Thomas sensed my discomfort and subtly guided me to a seat beside him, for which I was grateful. The housekeeper and a young man I had not seen before served the meal, something French, with a name I could not pronounce. The portion was tiny but artfully arranged. Back in my day, a dinner meant food that filled you up after a hard day's work. Meat, potatoes, vegetables from our garden. Margaret had been a wonderful cook, making simple ingredients taste like heaven. This meal, while impressive looking, seemed more about appearance than substance. Jackson's father ordered an expensive bottle of wine, making a show of approving it, before allowing the server to pour. When he noticed I was not drinking, he raised an eyebrow. "Not a wine man, Robert. I drive myself home," I explained simply. The truth was I could not afford a taxi if I had too much to drink, but I maintained my dignity. "Sensible," Walter said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. The conversation quickly turned to Jackson and his parents' recent vacation to the Maldives. They spent 20 minutes discussing private villas built over crystal blue waters, personal butlers, and excursions on private yachts. Amanda chimed in, occasionally mentioning how they planned to go there next year. "You should see the photos," she told me, then stopped, perhaps remembering I was not on social media to see the constant stream of their luxurious life. "We just finalized plans for our anniversary trip to Tuscany," Jackson announced. 2 weeks in a private villa with a personal chef." "That sounds wonderful, darling," Victoria cooed. "Your father and I were just saying we should buy a small place near Florence. The investment potential alone makes it worthwhile." The discussion shifted to real estate investments and stock portfolios. Jackson spoke with authority about market trends and investment strategies. His father nodded approvingly at his son's financial acumen. I picked at my food silently, having nothing to contribute to a conversation about million-dollar second homes. Thomas arrived late to dinner, having stepped out earlier to take a work call. As he slipped back into his seat beside me, I noticed the tension in his shoulders. He had always been sensitive to family dynamics, even as a child. "So Robert," Jackson's father addressed me directly for the first time in a while. "Amanda tells us you were in construction all your life." "Yes, 35 years, I answered, straightening slightly. "Worked my way up from laborer to foreman. Helped build half the structures in the south side of town." "Interesting career choice," he mused. "Did you ever consider something with more advancement potential?" The implication was clear. He was asking why I had chosen to remain working class when I could have aspired to more. "I considered college," I admitted. "But Margaret and I started our family young. Construction paid well enough to support them, and I was good at it. Found satisfaction in creating something tangible, something that would last." "But surely you must have wanted more," Victoria pressed, "especially for your children." "I wanted them to have opportunities," I explained, "to follow their dreams without financial burden. That was more important to me than climbing some corporate ladder." "And yet," Jackson interjected with a smirk, "here you are at 57 renting an apartment and struggling to make ends meet. One might argue that more ambition would have served you and your children better in the long run." Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but remained silent. Thomas tensed beside me. "Different measures of success, I suppose," I replied evenly, refusing to be baited. "Indeed," Jackson said, exchanging a knowing look with his father. "Speaking of measures of success, did we tell you about my promotion? Senior Vice President, now with the corner office and the company car." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. Despite everything, I did not begrudge him his success. I just wished it had not come with such arrogance. "Which reminds me," Jackson continued, swirling his wine. "Amanda mentioned you were looking to replace that truck of yours. Something about transmission problems." I felt heat rise to my face. Last month my truck had broken down, and the repair bill was more than I could afford at once. I had mentioned it to Amanda in passing, not as a request for help, but she must have told Jackson. "It is being handled," I said stiffly. "I am sure it is," Jackson replied. "But you know, if you need a small loan, I might be able to help. After all, family should help family, right?" His tone made it clear this was not a genuine offer, but another opportunity to highlight the disparity in our situations. Amanda finally spoke up. Jackson, Dad did not ask for help. No, no, of course not. Jackson backpedaled with false sincerity. Just offering. After all, it must be difficult adjusting to such reduced circumstances. The family home sold, living on a fixed income, working odd jobs at your age. Each word was like a small cut. I had always provided for my family. I had never been in debt until Margaret's illness. I had saved diligently for retirement, but medical bills and bad luck had depleted those savings far too quickly. The shame of my current situation was something I carried privately, and having it laid bare at this table was almost unbearable. Thomas put his fork down with more force than necessary. Dad has nothing to be ashamed of. He worked honestly his entire life and gave everything to his family. Of course, Jackson agreed insincerely. Very admirable, just not very profitable. As the meal progressed, the dynamic became increasingly clear. This dinner was not about reconnecting with family. It was a performance, a display of Jackson's success, and by extension, my failure. Every anecdote, every question seemed designed to highlight the contrast between his rise and my fall. I kept my dignity throughout, answering politely, complimenting the meal, asking appropriate questions about their lives. But inside, I felt a growing sense of disappointment, not in my own circumstances, but in what my daughter had become in this environment of wealth and status. Then came dessert, and with it the breaking point I had felt approaching all evening. Jackson stood as the servers brought in elaborately plated chocolate desserts, raising his wine glass with practiced elegance. The crystal caught the light as he looked around the table with satisfaction. I would like to propose a toast, he announced, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who has never doubted his place in the world. To success and those who achieve it. Everyone raised their glasses, even Amanda, who glanced at me apologetically as she did. I lifted my water glass politely, maintaining the facade of civility that was growing more difficult by the minute. You know, Jackson continued, looking directly at me now, I was thinking earlier today about the different paths people take in life. Some of us set ambitious goals, work smart, build networks, and create prosperity. He gestured around the opulent dining room. While others, he paused meaningfully. Well, they settle for less. They choose the easy, comfortable route, and then wonder why they end up struggling. The room went still. Thomas stared at his plate, his jaw clenched tight. Amanda looked like she wanted to disappear. Jackson's parents maintained their polite smiles, though his mother had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. Jackson, Amanda murmured, but he waved her off. No, this is an important lesson, he insisted. Choices have consequences. When Robert chose manual labor over education, when he bought a modest house instead of investing in property that would appreciate, when he put all his resources into his children without planning for his own future. Those were choices with predictable outcomes. Each word struck like a hammer, not because there was truth in them, though perhaps there was some, but because my son-in-law was systematically dismantling the values I had lived by recasting my sacrifices as failures of vision. Now, I am not saying there is no dignity in hard work, Jackson continued magnanimously. But there is a difference between working hard and working smart. One leads to this. He gestured again to his surroundings, and one leads to... He looked pointedly at me, leaving the sentence unfinished, but its meaning crystal clear. I felt a peculiar calm descend over me. The initial hurt and anger receded, replaced by something like clarity. I saw Jackson clearly in that moment, not as the successful businessman he presented to the world, but as a deeply insecure man who measured his worth entirely by material standards. I saw my daughter caught between the values she was raised with and the allure of wealth and status. I saw Thomas loyal but conflicted, unsure how to defend me without creating a scene. And I saw Margaret, not physically, of course, but I felt her presence acutely. I remembered a conversation we had when the children were small. "Success is not what you have, Bobby," she had said, using the nickname only she ever used. "It is who you are and what you leave behind in the hearts of others." Jackson was still talking, his words growing bolder with each sip of wine. "I sometimes wonder if you regret it, Robert. Looking back at your life choices now that you are, well, where you are. It must be difficult to watch others succeed while you—" He chuckled, the sound devoid of genuine humor. Then came the moment that would change everything. Jackson leaned forward, his expression a mixture of mock concern and barely concealed contempt. "Tell me, Robert, how does it feel to be a loser?" The table went completely silent. Even the servers froze in place. Amanda gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Thomas half rose from his chair, fury etched on his features. Jackson's mother whispered his name in shocked reproach, while his father stared stonily ahead. I should have been angry. I should have been hurt. Part of me was both. But something else was happening inside me. A profound realization about what truly mattered in a life well lived. All the status seeking, all the material acquisition Jackson prized so highly seemed suddenly hollow compared to the lives I had touched, the family I had raised, the honest work I had done. So instead of reacting with anger or shame, I smiled. It was a genuine smile, not forced or defensive. The expression clearly confused everyone at the table, especially Jackson, whose smug certainty faltered for the first time that evening. And in that moment of confusion, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. The smile on my face seemed to disturb Jackson more than any angry response could have. He had expected me to be humiliated, perhaps to leave the table in shame or to lash out defensively. My calm demeanor threw him off balance. "Did you hear me?" he asked, his voice losing some of its confidence. I set my napkin beside my plate and looked directly into his eyes. "I heard you, Jackson, and I have a question for you in return." I paused, letting the moment stretch. "What will you be remembered for when you are gone?" His expression shifted from smug certainty to confusion. "What?" "It is a simple question," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "When your life is over, what will you leave behind that matters? Who will remember you, and what will they say?" Jackson scoffed, but I noticed it lacked conviction. "I will leave behind a substantial estate, a successful career record, properties, investments." "No," I interrupted gently. "Those are things, not legacies. Things get sold, divided, forgotten. I am asking about the mark you will leave on human hearts." Thomas was looking at me with growing appreciation. Amanda sat perfectly still, her eyes wide. Jackson's parents exchanged glances I could not interpret. "Let me tell you what I will leave behind," I said, not waiting for Jackson's response. "Last month, the family stopped me in the hardware store, the Hendersons. 20 years ago, I helped build their first home, the one where they raised their children. John Henderson told his son, 'This man built our house so strong that even when that big storm came through in '05, we never worried once. And they still send me a Christmas card every year.'" I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. "2 weeks ago, Mrs. Patel from 3 doors down from our old house called me because her porch steps were rotting. Her husband died last year, and she had no one to help. I fixed those steps for the cost of materials. She cried and said I was the only person she could count on." She made me dinner as payment. Best curry I have ever had. Jackson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but I continued. The community center on Oak Street, I volunteered weekends for a year, helping build that place. Now hundreds of kids have somewhere safe to go after school. The director still calls me by name when I visit, shows me pictures of programs they run. Last year during the flood, 3 of my former crew members called me for advice on how to protect their homes. Not because I am rich or important, but because they trust me, respect me, and know I care. I leaned forward slightly. Jim Waters worked with me for 15 years. When his son got sick with leukemia, I organized the crew to cover his shifts so he could be at the hospital without losing pay. Last month, his son graduated college, cancer-free. Jim called to tell me his boy is becoming a doctor because of men like you who showed him what it means to help others. The dining room was absolutely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving, listening intently. So, yes, Jackson. I live in a small apartment instead of a mansion. I drive an old truck instead of a luxury car. My retirement account is modest. But when I walk through this town, people know me. They wave, they stop to chat. They remember kindnesses from decades ago. Their lives are better because I was here. I turned my gaze to each person at the table. The houses I built will shelter families long after I am gone. The young men I mentored in the trades are now supporting their own families with the skills I helped them develop. The neighbors I helped during hard times remember that someone cared. Then I looked back at Jackson. So my question stands. When you are gone, who will remember you with love, whose life is better because you were in it? Who will cry at your funeral besides those who stand to inherit your money? Jackson attempted to maintain his composure, but I could see I had struck a nerve. He tried to deflect. This is absurd. Success is measurable. Promotions, acquisitions, portfolio growth, not some vague notion of being remembered fondly. Is it absurd? I asked quietly. What use is all this? I gestured to the opulent surroundings. If you are alone in the end, if the only people at your funeral are there because they were paid to attend. People respect success, Jackson insisted, but his voice had lost its edge. People respect character, I corrected gently. They remember kindness, integrity, and how you made them feel. Money can buy presents, but it cannot buy genuine grief when you are gone. Amanda was watching me with an expression I had not seen in years, the way she looked at me when she was a little girl and thought I knew everything worth knowing. Thomas was nodding slightly, a small smile playing at his lips. Jackson's father cleared his throat. There is wisdom in what Robert is saying, son. I have attended too many funerals of wealthy men where the eulogies felt hollow, focusing on achievements rather than the man himself. Jackson's face flushed red. He was not used to his father taking someone else's side. I had not raised my voice once. I had not insulted Jackson or belittled his accomplishments. I had simply asked a question that cut through the materialism to something more fundamental, the true measure of a life well lived. And in the silence that followed, it was clear that my question had done what no angry outburst could have accomplished. It had made everyone at that table reconsider what truly matters. The silence that followed my question hung heavy in the air, but it did not last long. Jackson's expression shifted from confusion to defensive anger. This is ridiculous. He snapped, the veneer of politeness completely gone now. You come into me home and try to lecture me about success, you who has nothing to show for a lifetime of work. I remained calm. I have plenty to show, Jackson, just not things you value. Jackson, that is enough, Amanda said suddenly, her voice firm in a way I had not heard since she was a teenager standing up to bullies. "You owe my father an apology." Jackson looked at her in disbelief. "An apology for what?" Stating the obvious. "Your father is a failure by any objective measure." I was merely pointing out. "My father," Amanda interrupted, "is the most successful man I know. If success is measured by integrity, by kindness, by the lives he has touched, and I am ashamed that I have allowed you to disrespect him for so long." Jackson's face reddened further. "You are taking his side after everything I have given you. Given me." Amanda's voice rose slightly. "You talk about everything as a transaction. My father gave without expecting anything in return. That is the difference." Thomas stood up now, his quiet presence suddenly commanding attention. "Jackson, I have sat by too long watching you belittle my father. Not anymore." "Oh, now the prodigal son speaks up," Jackson sneered. "Where were you when your father needed help with medical bills? Too busy with your own career to notice, weren't you?" Thomas flinched at the accusation, but held his ground. "You are right about one thing. I should have been there more. That is on me, and something I intend to fix, but at least I recognize what I have been missing. You have everything and appreciate nothing." Jackson's laugh was bitter. "Such family loyalty, how touching. Tell me, Thomas, did your father mention that he called me last month, asking for a loan? $5,000 for car repairs, was it? Some success story?" "I never asked you for money," I said quietly, but firmly. "I mentioned to Amanda that I was looking into repair options for my truck. She offered help, which I declined. I never asked either of you for a cent." "It amounts to the same thing," Jackson dismissed. "The point is, for all your talk of community respect and fond memories, you cannot afford basic necessities without charity." Thomas's expression changed suddenly. "That is rich coming from you, Jackson. Tell me, have you told Amanda about the Westlake project yet? Or about the margin calls you have been getting?" The color drained from Jackson's face. "Shut up. You don't know what you're talking about." "I work in financial marketing, Jackson. People talk. Word is your firm overextended on that development, and you personally guaranteed some of the loans. Word is you have been leveraging everything trying to keep up appearances." Amanda turned to her husband. "Jackson, what is he talking about?" "Nothing. Just rumors and speculation. Thomas doesn't know anything about my business." "I know enough," Thomas continued calmly. "I know you remortgaged this house 6 months ago. I know there have been layoffs at your firm, and you are next in line if things don't turn around. I know that car," he nodded toward the window where Jackson's Mercedes was visible, "is leased, not owned, despite what you tell everyone." Jackson stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is enough. This is my house, and I will not be interrogated at my own table." "Is it true?" Amanda asked, her voice small. "Are we in financial trouble?" "Of course not." Jackson scoffed, but his eyes did not meet hers. "There have been some temporary setbacks, that is all. Completely normal in my industry." "Then why did you not tell me?" Amanda pressed. "Why am I hearing this from my brother at a dinner party?" "Because it is not your concern," Jackson snapped. "I handle the finances. You handle whatever it is you do all day in this house." The cruel dismissal hung in the air. Amanda's face showed shock, then hurt, then something harder. Resolve. "I think," she said slowly, "that it very much is my concern, especially if you have been making decisions that affect our future without consulting me." Jackson's parents had been watching the unfolding scene with increasing discomfort. Now Walter cleared his throat. Perhaps we should give you some privacy to discuss this, son. There is nothing to discuss, Jackson insisted. Everything is under control. Thomas is exaggerating based on office gossip and half-truths. Am I? Thomas asked quietly. Then you won't mind showing Amanda the mortgage statement, or explaining why you canceled the Tuscany trip insurance last week, or why you have been quietly selling off her jewelry. Amanda gasped. My grandmother's pearls. You said they were being cleaned. The facade was crumbling rapidly now. Jackson's carefully constructed image of success and superiority was collapsing before our eyes. He looked around the table wildly, like a cornered animal seeking escape. This is all temporary, he insisted, his voice rising. Every investor faces setbacks. I will recover everything and more. I just need time and more of my family heirlooms to pawn. Amanda asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. Jackson turned on me suddenly. This is your fault. You turned them against me. I shook my head slowly. I just asked a question, Jackson. Everything else came from you. With a string of profanities, Jackson stormed out of the dining room. We heard a door slam somewhere in the house, then silence. Amanda sat very still, processing everything she had just learned. Then, to my surprise, she began to cry. Quiet, dignified tears that broke my heart. I moved to comfort her, but before I could, Thomas was there, his arm around her shoulders. I am sorry, sis. I should have told you sooner, but I only confirmed it recently. It is not just the money, she said, wiping her eyes. It is the lies. The way he has been treating Dad. The person I have become around him. She looked up at me, her eyes wet. Dad, I am so sorry. I have been horrible to you. No, sweetheart, I said, finally moving to her side. You have been finding your way. We all make mistakes. Some bigger than others, she said with a weak smile. To my surprise, Jackson's father approached me as the siblings comforted each other. Robert, he said quietly, I owe you an apology as well. I allowed my son's behavior to continue unchecked for too long. Your question, it made me realize I have failed in some fundamental aspect of fatherhood. I studied the older man's face, seeing genuine regret there. It is never too late to change course, I told him. For any of us. Victoria joined her husband. We raised Jackson to value achievement above all else. We thought we were doing right by him. Perhaps we were wrong. The evening had taken a turn none of us could have predicted. What began as my humiliation had transformed into something else entirely. A moment of truth that stripped away pretense and forced everyone to confront reality. As I comforted my daughter and watched the various realizations ripple through the people around me, I felt no triumph, no vindication. Only a profound sadness for the wasted years and false values mixed with hope that perhaps from this painful moment something better might emerge. The drive back to my apartment that night was surreal. The dinner had imploded in a way no one could have anticipated, revealing cracks in relationships and facades that had been papered over for years. As I unlocked the door to my modest one-bedroom, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pain at seeing my daughter hurt, anger at Jackson's treatment of her and me, but also a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, I had stood my ground without compromising my dignity. I had not shouted or insulted anyone. I had simply asked a question that cut to the heart of what matters. Margaret would have been proud. I slept better that night than I had in months, despite the emotional turmoil of the evening. When my phone rang the next morning, I was surprised to see Amanda's name on the screen. Dad. Her voice sounded hoarse, as if she had been crying. "Can I come over just to talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Any time." She arrived an hour later, looking tired but somehow lighter. I had worried she might be embarrassed by my small apartment, but she entered with no hesitation, looking around with interest rather than judgment. "You have made it nice," she commented, noticing the bookshelves I had built myself and the small woodworking area I had set up in one corner. "It feels like you." We sat at my small kitchen table, coffee mugs in hand. Amanda stared into hers for a long moment before speaking. "I need to apologize, Dad. Really apologize, not just the quick, 'I am sorry' from last night. I have been awful to you these past few years. You have been finding your way." I repeated my words from the night before. She shook her head. "No, I have been lost. I got so caught up in Jackson's world, the status, the money, the social climbing, that I forgot what you and Mom taught me about what really matters." Tears filled her eyes. "When Mom died, I should have been there more. Instead, I pulled away because your grief and struggles did not fit into the perfect life I was trying to create." I reached across the table and took her hand. "We all handle grief differently. Jackson and I talked most of the night," she continued. "Well fought is more accurate. He finally admitted everything. The financial problems, the lies, the disrespect toward you. He has been making increasingly risky investments trying to maintain our lifestyle and impress his parents." "I am sorry you are going through this," I said sincerely. "The thing is," Amanda said, looking up at me, "I am almost relieved. Living that life, always worried about appearances, always competing with everyone. It was exhausting, and I was becoming someone I did not like." We talked for hours that day, really talked in a way we had not since before Margaret died. Amanda shared her fears, her regrets, and her confusion about the future. I mostly listened, offering support without judgment. "I do not know what happens next with Jackson and me," she admitted, as afternoon turned to evening. "But I do know I want you back in my life, Dad. Really in it, not just occasional dinners where everyone is uncomfortable." The weeks that followed brought changes I could never have predicted. Thomas began visiting regularly, sometimes bringing work with him, but making time to help me with woodworking projects, or just to watch baseball games like we used to. Each visit seemed to ease some burden he carried about not being there enough after his mother died. Amanda came by several times a week. She and Jackson were in counseling, she explained. He had been humbled by the exposure of his financial deceptions and by her willingness to consider working through their problems despite his behavior. To my great surprise, Jackson himself showed up at my door one rainy Tuesday afternoon, looking nothing like the arrogant man from the dinner. His expensive suit was replaced by jeans and a simple button-up shirt, and the cockiness in his expression was gone. "Robert," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. Several, actually." I invited him in, curious despite my lingering anger. We sat awkwardly in my small living room, the rain pattering against the windows. "I have been," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I have been a complete ass. To you, to Amanda, to everyone really. My whole life I have measured success by the wrong metrics. My parents did too, though they are starting to see things differently now." I let him talk without interruption. He explained about the financial troubles, how they stemmed from increasingly desperate attempts to maintain the appearance of success. He talked about his fear of failure, of disappointing his parents, of being seen as anything less than exceptional. "Your question that night," he said, "about what I will be remembered for, it has been haunting me. I realized I don't have an answer. No one would remember me with any real affection, just as the guy with the big house and expensive car. Recognition is the first step toward change, I offered. Amanda says the same thing, he said with a small smile. She is extraordinary, better than I deserve. She is giving me a chance to fix things to be better. I want to start by making things right with you. It was not an instant reconciliation. The hurt ran too deep for that. But it was a beginning, an opening that might with time and effort lead to something resembling respect, perhaps even family. The greatest change, however, was in how I saw myself. For years after Margaret's death and my financial decline, I had internalized the world's judgment. I had begun to see myself as Jackson saw me, a failure, someone who had made the wrong choices. The dinner confrontation had forced me to articulate what I knew deep down, that a life should be measured by more than material wealth, that my choices had value, even if they did not lead to financial success. A year later, we gathered for another family dinner. This time at Thomas's new house, a modest but comfortable place he had bought closer to my apartment. Amanda and Jackson were there, their relationship still a work in progress, but moving in a positive direction. Jackson had taken a step back in his career, accepting a less prestigious but more stable position that allowed for better work-life balance. Amanda had returned to teaching, rekindling her mother's passion for education. Jackson's parents came too transformed in subtle ways by the events of that fateful dinner. They were less ostentatious, more genuine in their interactions. Walter had been volunteering with a mentorship program for underprivileged youth finding purpose beyond accumulating wealth. As we sat around Thomas's dining table, far less fancy than Jackson's but warm and welcoming, I looked at the faces of my family. The healing was not complete. The relationships still fragile in places, but there was authentic connection now, where once there had been only performance. When Jackson proposed a toast, I felt a moment of déjà vu, remembering his cruel words a year before. But this time he raised his glass and said simply, "To family, to health, and to measuring success by the right things." Our eyes met across the table, and I saw genuine humility there. I raised my glass in response, marveling at how a single question had set in motion such profound change. And that night, as I drove home to my apartment, the same one though now filled with more family photos and evidence of frequent visitors, I thought about Margaret. She would have been proud of our children finding their way back to what matters. She would have been proud of me for maintaining my dignity in the face of judgment and for having the courage to speak truth without cruelty. "We did good, Maggie," I whispered to the night air. "Not perfect, but good." And in that moment, by any measure that truly mattered, I knew myself to be rich beyond counting. Have you ever had to stand your ground with quiet dignity when someone tried to make you feel small? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that true success is never about what you own, but about the lives you touch and the love you leave behind. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales of healing and redemption. And share this with someone who might need a reminder that their worth is not determined by their bank account. Thank you for listening to my story.